Hello, and good morning, folks. So, today I wanted to take a quick second to talk about probably one of the more, I guess, kind of hit or miss entries into the Ogre series, and yeah, just kind of in general what people tend to like about it, what people tend to dislike about it, because truth be told, when it comes to March of the Black Queen here, one thing that I generally see over and over is folks either absolutely love it or absolutely hate it, and that's, well, largely because it's kind of an odd duck. So first things first, before we actually get into it, this is actually going to be about the PS1 version. So there's two different versions, well, technically three different versions of this thing that came out. Most of them are, by and large, kind of sort of the same. However, the PS1 version is, well, as far as I'm concerned, a very, very, very drastic improvement. But yeah, basically, when it comes to this thing, usually most folks that end up running into it, since it wasn't exactly terribly well advertised, it's one of those things that comes out with an awkward name, so if somebody sees the name, they're not immediately going to be like, hey, I know exactly what that is. So, for example, like, FFT is one of those ones that ended up gaining a lot of popularity, I think largely based on the name recognition, because they're like, hey, it's a Final Fantasy game, it's a tactics RPG, it makes sense, okay, the title makes sense here. It really didn't matter too much what they were planning to do by that point, it was already attached to a good name. Somebody takes a look at Ogre Battle, and they're like, okay, so this is going to be like some thing where you just like fight a bunch of Shreks together, or what's the deal here? So anyway, yeah, because especially the Ogre Battle song, and especially most of the songs that the entire series was named after, tended not to do particularly well in the States. That certainly didn't help it stateside here. But anyway, another thing is actually, technically speaking, oops, didn't mean to hit the mic there. When most folks go back and look at this thing, they're expecting an SRPG in terms of, like, well, like your Fire Emblems or whatnot, or even like a Tactics Ogre and things like that, because typically what I see is the folks will go to FFT, they'll maybe try something like the GBA game, or they'll go and try the DS game, and then they'll be like, hey, you know, maybe something came before this, what else did this guy take part in? And so, you know, they end up going back and they're like, okay, there's a Tactics Ogre, that sounds like something that's similar, and then they try it and they're like, hey, this is pretty cool. Let's see, who do we want to go for? It's funny, you got two different protagonists you can go for in this one. One of them is like a Conan the Barbarian looking guy, or you got like Samurai chick. Anyway, but the funny part is, while that's generally how most folks define like SRPGs, you know, you got your tiles, you got your stats, you got your in most cases permadeath and things like that, but in this particular one, technically speaking, it's still an SRPG. However, it says on the box itself that they've got a different definition of SRPG. It's not a strategy RPG, although technically speaking, there's still a bunch of that. It's a sim RPG, as they call it. Although not so much what Fire Emblem became in that regard. It's more in terms of it tries to simulate the entire world first, and then it's kind of an RPG second. That's more or less Matsuno's whole thing there. So, just going to go ahead and answer these pretty randomly here. We'll get into the mechanics and nitty-gritty of that later, but mostly what I wanted to do is kind of give a glimpse into the game for the folks that didn't really like it, and potentially explain what the weirdness is. Although I'm fairly certain this particular part is pretty clear to the folks that do like it. But yeah, I'm sure most folks that do love the game can be like, hey, I understand where the jank comes from. You know, I can see why people thought this was kind of weird. In this particular one, usually it's the folks that didn't like it that wind up kind of confused as to what exactly was going on here. So, like I was saying earlier, the whole deal when they were making this game was to try to simulate a world more than anything. So it's not actually about winning fights. If you either listen to, watch, or even played like tabletop games and things like that, it's a bit closer to that than for example, something more like Fire Emblem or what have you. You're not there to try to win the fights, you're there to resolve them, whatever that may particularly be. This actually If you've played Tactics Ogre, the general idea of the TO series was pretty much to take what's going on in this game and boil it down into a more personal story. And then you got Ogre Battle 64, which was kind of like an in-between of both, where you still had the kind of whole deep personal story going on, and all the choice and consequence, however, you still had the general gameplay of this one. So, okay, first of all, what was the deal with the questions at the start? Well, every one of these games in the series will start off with the same kind of vague questions. It's kind of like a personality test. You can also see it as a soft randomizer. Like, personally, I like to answer them at random, or just make up a character or whatever else, and just, you know, kind of spitball what theoretically would work there. Works particularly well for challenge runs in that regard. But yeah, so you basically go and you answer all your things, you get a particular main character, you get a particular starting party. So, for example, in this particular one, there's essentially a behind-the-scenes point system. Every one of those puts you within a certain category, and that's how you get your stats, main characters, and all that. Now, so that's basically randomizing your start, more or less. You have a ton of different main characters you can start off with this one, like some of them are casters. This is the one that I probably end up playing with the most. It's basically either the dark or ice one. The actual element itself, like, some stuff is weak to certain elements and what have you, but in general, every one of your leader characters is going to be pretty dang strong. I personally like the big AoE ones, though most speedruns and things like that go for the ones that get 3 attacks in the front. But yeah, you have a bunch of different... I believe you can start off with almost any elements and just start off as either a caster or a melee type character. Anyway, none of that particularly matters without understanding how the systems in this game actually work, of which there's a lot more than it first seems. So, first of all, I guess since we're already on the screen, we might as well explain what's going on here. So, first of all, what's the deal with this weird party layout here? Well, in general, every time the two squads fight, unlike what will later be changed in OB64, they will always just fight each other head-on, so whatever's on the left side is your front line, whatever's in the back is your back line, and everyone can be kind of seen as having 3 lanes in front of them. So, for example, like this one over here would essentially be able to hit these two and whatever's in between of the opposite front line if they were attacking melee, or if they were, like it says here, since it says B for back row, it says Ice Cloud, they would instead be attacking the entire group. So they'd be able to hit all 6 tiles there. Now, well, I guess more 10 than 6, because it could be seen as 10 slots. So you have a maximum of 5 people per each team, and then the types of units in that particular team will end up adjusting how it moves, like what it does. The general categories of units will be kind of determining what exactly it is that how they interact, so to speak. So, for example, these ones right here, they're fairly neutral. I believe they're locked in at 46 charisma, 50 alignment. A little bit more on that later. It's their main attacking stats on the left that seem to be randomized, as well as their health. And then over here, you basically have your one special character you start off with and your main character. So charisma is basically just how likable you are. That matters in a little bit, and then alignment is just, well, exactly like it says, your overall, morality from good to bad there. Later on, it would lean more into law and chaos, but for the first entry here, it's more of just whether people like you or don't. However, that being said, the initial beginnings of that whole law and chaos system do still show up in this one. So, as you see, you start off with your meter right in the middle, everyone's kind of neutral towards you, and generally speaking, you're usually not going to notice too much of a difference within the first few maps. However, what this one boils down to, like I said earlier, is not necessarily winning fights as much as managing how those fights are going to go. So, for example, the first town you're expected to come and liberate here, which I should mention, they don't visually distinguish the difference between liberations and captures in this one. Despite that being a mechanic, it's kind of it's one of those things I think they mentioned in the manual. I forget. Like, at this point, I'm completely confused as to what's in the manual and what was in the guide. But yeah, so each town will have different preferences, whether they prefer low, medium, or high of each of those things. So, for example, I think it's like 1 to 40 40 to like 40 to 70, and then actually no, like 40 to 60, and then 60 or 61 to 100. As far as those go. Now, okay, you may notice we're moving slow as crap right now. There's not too much you can do about that in the first map here, which, by the way, if you're wondering why stuff's going along all over the place, I tried to do this whole convenience thing with my Vita, since that's what I'm playing this on right now, of essentially assigning the somewhat janky right stick as a second D-pad, so occasionally it just kind of backs up. Either way, that's fine. So you may notice the PS1 version, if you play the SNES version, it runs a bit smoother, the music sounds a little nicer. There was an odd thing that they added. Whether this is a feature or a downside is up to you, but when you pause it, the music stops. For playing it normally, I consider that a really good thing. For trying to stream or record this thing, it sounds a little awkward, but yeah. So we're going to take this one since it's just a free thing here. Again, it always says Liberation, however, there is a difference between liberations and captures. Another mechanic they don't really necessarily explain right at the very start here. So like right here, they're basically saying liberations are entirely about the money. I have a feeling they probably meant to go back and add more of these mechanics into the actual text and then just didn't have time or something. Because they really didn't expect this thing to sell well, and surprisingly it did. Like, I forget what the exact numbers were, but they basically made it as a, you know, this will be kind of a fun idea. Let's just kind of see what happens. Like, personally, I kind of see it in the same vein as, what's his face? The French guy that made the Fable games. Is he French? I don't know. Anyway, that guy. Most of the games that he made are kind of in a similar vein, where there's a lot of interesting mechanics, but it's unclear whether they necessarily pulled everything together too well. But yeah, personally, I view this one as the most chaotic game in the series. But again, it just entirely it's going to depend on the person whether you think that's a good thing or not. You may have noticed earlier, if you played this one before, we started off with getting that honor shield item at the very start. That, more than likely, is not what you found there, because everything in this dang game is randomized. I can zoom in, zoom out. You kind of got this. So if I can find the button, there we go. A little up and down map if you want it. Like, but personally, I like the other map better, but it just looks a little bit more stylish. It's neat that they had it in there. In fact, I believe this is actually what the map properly looks like, and then they just did this whole, it's not quite Mode 7, but whatever the hell it's called thing, just as just a bit of a why not kind of situation. So at this point, you can deploy another unit. There's really no reason to. But yeah, so like I said, every item in this game is randomized. So every time that you go through, depending on your questions at the start, depending on how many game ticks have gone by and all that kind of thing, you're going to get different items all over the place. This means that some runs you might be completely starving for items, and you might have a hard time getting money, and you might be running into this, that, or the other. And then another time you might be going through, and then suddenly you just get liches within the first few maps, and then you get access to, like, all kinds of crazy weapons in the first few maps, which is fairly close to what happened with the Fairy-Only challenge a little while ago, where we wound up with a situation where there was literally a lich within the first 5 maps, and then we had this whole interesting situation of trying to figure out how exactly to create a character with high charisma but low alignment. So every time that you get into a fight, I should probably explain this, depending on the stereotype of that character, you're basically going to have your alignment going up or down. Now, it's a mix of both the stereotype of the character as well as... Oh, wow. He's actually, he's hitting pretty dang hard here. So it's a mix of that stereotype as well as the time of day, as well as the level of discrepancy between the different characters that's going to determine how exactly everything's going. So, in this case... Sorry, having a little bit of control delay with this whole connection thing. Oh well. But anyway. So, for example, in this particular case, I believe they're technically at a lower level than this guy, so they're going to be getting more experience out of it, but they're also getting additional alignment for going to fight him in the first place. Basically, if a character is seen as doing something brave by the game, then they will hopefully not instantly die in the intro. then they will have their alignment go up, as well as their charisma. Their charisma goes up from their confidence, so from winning fights, more or less. If they retreat from a fight, they end up losing both. So it's one of these things where, like, throughout the entire game, it's kind of judging you on everything that you're doing and how you're doing it. That's what makes the thing special to a lot of people, because it judges all these things and it reacts accordingly. Personally, I saw that as a hell of a lot like New Vegas, but that in a little bit of a different way. Like, instead of being a direct reputation system all over the place, instead it's just a series of little mini mechanics kind of working together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, if, for example, you might be thinking all of this seems really abusable by the fact that you could, well, say go in and just have one super squad throughout the entire thing. True. You can absolutely curb stomp this game by, for example, well, the second battle here. To show you how easy that is, let's go ahead and take a look. Alright, so, what do you always start off with? Like, many of these units and different squads and whatever else will have different stuff that they come with, depending on your questions. It's just fun to see the kinds of things you get. However, this little pile on the right, you'll always get. You basically have a mix of 3 of each gender ground units, if you feel like going infantry, and then you have these 2 right here. If these 2 weren't here, I would honestly rate this game a hell of a lot lower. Because these 2 allow you to start the game with a frickin' Air Force, and these 2 allow you to go faster on water. That's all well and good, but also, you know, flight is pretty nifty. So, for example, say we wanted to mess with this squad here real quick. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over here, we're going to remove some characters. Healer's nice. We'll go ahead and remove this one. We'll go ahead and remove this one. Alright. Next, we'll go ahead and remove this guy as leader of this squad. Yeah, that's fine. And then we'll go ahead and find a knight somewhere. Actually, even a samurai. Samurai's fine. Yeah, you may notice some other classes showing up from other games in the series. Basically, everybody had a bunch of little subclasses going on. So, for example, you start off with samurai that eventually turned into sword masters. Start off with knights that eventually became paladins and all that kind of thing. But yeah, this one has little promotion trees for all your different unit types, and there's actually way more units than most folks will ever run into in a single playthrough. Like, for example, you saw that little soldier guy that just got sent away. Well, for example, if he gets attacked by any werewolf in the game and gets knocked out, there's, I believe, like a 30% chance he'll become a werewolf as well. Or, for example, you can grab a werewolf, or not a werewolf, somewhere. There's a particular item that you can use at night to turn somebody into a were-tiger. Or, for example, you have particular mages that go down particular trees that, you know, can become liches. Or, you may find the most busted item in the game at some point and just immediately get a dream crown at the start of the game. Which is an item that will turn any of your basic female units into a princess, which will basically mean that A, this place's entire, like, government structure runs off finding a piece of jewelry, and B, creates a situation where you have a unit that will, at any given time, will be able to just give you 3 rounds of, essentially 3 rounds of attack for any double attacker. They will automatically add a round. On top of that, they will give you, let's just do something like this, I guess. It's not really the most busted unit you can make, but screw it. But yeah, they will automatically give an extra round. They have a really good AoE, as well as, I believe, the best stats in the game. So yeah, you can just win forever if you have that item. And if you slap them onto your leader, they're the only one that can't accidentally get tricked into defecting, which is also a mechanic in this game. It's kind of weird. But yeah, sometimes certain bosses will just, in the middle of dialogue, be like, hey, do you feel like defecting? Are you sure? And then they'll just defect. It's weird. I'm not entirely sure why it's there, but hey. You know, it's one of those little noob trap moments. But, like, this entire game is just like that. It's just this weird mess of bizarre systems and absolute chaos that if you're open to it, it might just be entirely what you're looking for, you know, just this bizarre, chaotic experience. I might be saying, you know, how are the fights themselves? It seems like everything is just fighting on its own and not doing anything. Not necessarily true. So there's a lot more strategy than it initially seems, and I believe that's one of those things that tends to throw folks off as well. Because it might seem like, yeah, you're just sending squads to run over and just roll over things left and right. And not exactly. Not exactly. And again, especially in the PS1 version with the better AI, I will say the SNES version was not entirely up my alley the first few times I tried it, because, yeah, they will beeline towards anything in a really annoying manner. It might seem like everything in the game is decided by RNG. Again, these little stats up and down, they're very minor. Like, this little up and down thing, you're generally seeing about a 1... It's a 1 to 2% increase or decrease in terms of anything that will actually affect the story or your events. So, for example, your reputation meter going up and down, or your charisma and alignment going up and down. It's going to be fairly minor. You get 1 to 3% on your stats, as well as, I believe, like 1 to 5 on anything like health or whatnot. I believe score-wise, the way it goes is if you take a city properly, you get 4 points plus, I believe, some amount of difference based on the charisma and stuff like that. I think it might be like if you match one of the categories, you get an increase of 2. You get the full 4 if you do. If you meet both criteria, and then I believe you lose 8 if you lose that town. So the challenge in this game is not necessarily to, like I said, to win fights. You can absolutely curb stomp most of the fights in this game. The challenge is getting through it without pissing off the locals. Fight it out. So, for example, if you lose cities over and over, you'll be given cards. Like, you have that crutch. It will give you a card to win a fight at some point. So there we go. We'll start off with this rando fight over here. Like, you may notice, a lot of these encounters are not necessarily difficult themselves. And another little thing I should probably mention is actually something I forgot to do with this team, is when it comes to your commands, you have these cards. You can use them in any fight. Some of them work on bosses, some don't, but these are your main attack methods. So best, which is, I forget if it was, I think it was better translated in this one, but best is just basically whatever the AI thinks is best. You got most HP, leader, and weak. Now, that seems like it'd be pretty vague, but 90% of the time or so, I find that that's generally the only stuff you actually need. These are pretty simple 5v5 fights in most cases. There, we can go ahead and just do death here to wipe out this team. They might have one that survives, but that's fine. I should mention also the PS1 version actually does properly explain what each of the cards do. You just hit circle on anything and it explains it to you. So I'm just going to slap her with a cross, why not? But okay. So, what happens at this point is what a good friend of mine generally refers to as the Skulltopus. So, if a leader is ever killed, their squad will run away to the nearest town that they can conveniently get to, that's properly revealed on the map. Like, there are hidden towns on every map, there's hidden items and stuff like that, but at that point they will retreat. That's why you'd ever want to do attack leader. This basically creates a situation where you aren't, for example, like, if you're over-leveled, you should only ever go for the leader, because, well, it decapitates the team, it gets them out of the fight. You may run into them later, if you're, if you're looking into that kind of thing, but there's a decent chance you'll run into them later. But if you can avoid all enemies and just, go straight for the capital there, you'll be intentionally under-leveled, which will put you in a position where you'll usually end up getting better results from the game. So the more you challenge run this thing... Oh, Dwarf Sword, okay. Sweet. We'll go ahead and give that to one of our characters up here. Yeah, you may notice everybody gets one item. This later went on to a full equip thing for OB64. But yeah, generally speaking, you just... they're just one item that you can use as kind of a modifier item for everybody. Again, kind of similar to some older, like, wargaming type situations where you just basically added a modified version of that. Generally, a lot of the stuff that Matsuno did over the years or was a part of tended to look a hell of a lot like he always wanted to create some kind of tabletop game, but then just couldn't ever, I don't know, get the budget for it or something. It's unclear. It's unclear, but like especially for the PSP remake, or the Tactics Ogre PSP remake, there was a whole lot in there that was like, yeah, he wanted to make an edition of D&D, didn't he? Because there's a whole lot of modifiers going on. But yeah, each of these cards will do something different. Like, for example, you got Sun here that will basically nuke all characters based off their alignment. You got this one that'll wipe out any enemies at half or lower health. You got this one that just does a basic dark attack there. We didn't get my favorite one, and I'm hoping the Justice card shows up at some point because I want to point that out, because it's my favorite because it's a bad pun. Like, I specifically saw a review of this recently, which understandably, like, it was going into a lot of the mechanics of this one from an outside perspective, and yeah, admittedly, it's a total clusterfuck at first glance. But one of the things in particular was why Justice was the Blizzard attack.
Find out.
Think about it for a second. It's just ice. It's an awful pun. It's my favorite item in this damn game for that exact reason.
Find it out.
It's so stupid, but you just know. You just know. Because here's my theory on this. Because all of these were named after Englishly named songs at the time. I mean, specifically the ones that made it in Japan. It's a whole weird story as far as that goes. Anyway, but specifically, it was clear that they knew they were going international. They knew they need translations, except for Prince of Zenobia. We don't talk about that game though. And yeah, it's pretty clear that they had a pretty decent idea for puns in a lot of cases. There's actually kind of a running theme now in terms of the Halt Hammer that shows up in every one of these games, as to whether or not it's an MC Hammer reference, because it doesn't make sense in any other way. Like, personally, I thought, it was maybe a mistranslation in terms of, like, HART, you got the R and L thing going on for Japanese translations. Maybe it was supposed to be, hard hammer or something like that. But it's specifically been mistranslated even after their translations got better. And then somebody brought up, like, hey, maybe it's just literally Halt Hammer time. It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I forget if it was Rakes or somebody else that brought that up in the One Vision Discord, but that is some good coffee. Anyway, so we're still basically plowing through this whole thing here. Like, when it comes to how this game is enjoyable and things like that, personally, I see this entire thing as just probably the best chilling game of the series. Because a lot of it is you just have a general goal and you push towards it, rather than getting into too much nitty-gritty. I also did that a little bit too late. I was meaning to just devil card these guys. Like, for example, if you turn the cleric into a princess here, this squad would be able to just wipe the rest of the game like nothing.
Find it out.
Technically speaking, it probably would be a better idea to put a sword master and ninja in the front line of that one. Generally speaking, you want a good mix of AoE as well as quick DPS units. Which you may say so far, like, hey, I've only seen like 1 to 3 attacks. How do you have these different types of units doing different things? It doesn't make any difference. Just use the ones with the big numbers. Not exactly. Not exactly. Because all of these guys will, as I mentioned earlier, generally always just try to do the best that they can in any given situation. These first few, sure, they're just doing basic attacks, and a lot of the initial parties that you start with don't necessarily do a very good job in terms of explaining how they should be used. That one in particular, because, for example, they had a Beastmaster and a Hellhound. Okay, good choice. Not sure why they stuck two... Oh, apologize. Apparently that coffee wants to come up today. But yeah, they basically went and they stuck 2 Amazons in there instead of another beast unit or one of those octopi or something like that. Warren starts off in an odd position in which he has two triple attacking units in these Hellhounds, but then he's just a caster, so it kind of works in terms of, I guess, attacks and things like that, but it's kind of suboptimal. Also, kind of a funny note, Yeah, the Amazons have jiggle physics. Don't question it too much. It's a SNES game. And no, that wasn't added in the PS1 version. I double-checked on the SNES version. They do have jiggle physics in their animation. It's an odd time as far as that goes. Anyway, so just to show this right here, yeah, your teams get Skulltopused as well. You can change the leader of the squad to actually remove that status. But yeah, unfortunately, there's nobody else that can be a leader in that squad. Again, another reason that one's just kind of terrible. Generally, in terms of overall strategies for this one, like, for example, these guys have multiple promoted units. They'd be very effective in terms of adjusting to losing a leader, for example. The only actual punishment you get for losing a leader unit is that they run back to base, and they lose all experience that they've gained. So it's not exactly free, so to speak. But you aren't necessarily going to get punished too much for it. And this is largely because, well, again, this game is not necessarily difficult on a strategic front. Oh, and by the way, this is one of those ones that it's your first example to let you know that they will occasionally throw this at you. But there's a defection mechanic, although he won't take you seriously. Even if you tell him yes, he'll just tell you no. No, I don't believe you. But yeah. So yeah, in terms of how different squads are built and whatever else, there's a lot of really busted combinations. However, the interesting part of this game is getting the events. Like, figuring out different ways to beat the game without pissing off locals, like I said. Even later on, once you're properly doing the whole invasion thing, you will essentially get to a position where, yeah, you eventually want to do the opposite of what the towns want. Oof. Well, that backfired. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking through my cards here real quick. Just go laser this guy. Nuked. There we go. By the way, I should mention you don't really want to keep using the cards over and over, because unless they win the fight themselves, it's not actually counting towards their damage total. You may have noticed that whoever does more damage in any particular round will throw the other one backwards. I will say, I personally think this one handled it a little better than 64, but that kind of depends on how you're looking at it. So if a unit is forced to retreat, they're generally just thrown backwards. In this one, usually one retreat will put you at the edge of town, which will mean that you will have 2 encounters per town to be able to save it. In 64, you'll generally get thrown far enough away that if one unit gets thrown back, if you don't have a backup, you've probably lost that town. Arguably, that's the better balance, but in terms of how these games tend to go, I think I probably just found that one incredibly frustrating, because my first time through was with a ferry run, which, it turns out having little mosquitoes that can slap stuff isn't necessarily amazing for, for overall firepower. But yeah, ran into some interesting frustrations as far as that one. So this is the general flow of the game. You go around, there's different events on different maps. You eventually get to bigger maps with more interesting events going on. You get different branching paths in terms of what kind of stuff you want to deal with at what time. Let me see if circle menu works on this, actually. Does it say? No. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on there. At any point, you can actually go back and, for example, if you just blitz through an entire map and you didn't get your reputation gains for liberating a town, you can actually go back at any given point and just take those towns. Typically, that's the best way to do it. You may have noticed that this squad right here is able to move a hell of a lot faster than everyone else because they can frickin' fly. So yeah, once you realize that you can have 2 units just blitzing across the map at the speed of light, it's generally a lot better. Sorry that menu keeps coming up. The trigger buttons on the Vita are on the back, so every time that I lean over and kind of like lean the system, that happens. So yeah, in the PS1 version, you can also just... There we go! The Just Ice card. Oh, it's such a dumb pun, I love it. No! No, I ruined it! Ah, crap. Well, thanks, janky thumbstick. Oh well. I'll just blame the controls on that one. Alright, let's go ahead and go back to the world map here. Oh yeah, so, as I like to say, depending on what games you're playing, The weird part about the Ogre series is that when it comes to SRPGs, they're more on the RPG than the strategy side in a lot of cases. There is a lot of strategic gameplay and things like that. Personally, my favorite part, and actually the thing that got me into the series in the first place, was always shield bashing stuff off of castle walls. Don't ask, it's fun. Especially the PSP remake added a whole lot of extra means to shield bash units off of stuff, and even made the AI know how to do it. So there's a lot of stuff like that. This one, I mean, you're usually expected to go around, explore the towns, and figure out the lore, and, like, understand all this different stuff. Like, for example, in this particular one, I'm trying to remember how to do, apparently there's some way to do waypoints in this one as well. Yeah, supposedly the waypoint system started in the PS1 version of this, or actually, no, it started in the Saturn version, which then translated to Prince of Zenobia, which then went over to the PS1 version, allegedly. And by the way, never use these initial starting teams. They're terrible. You usually want to actually block off gaps with your different unit types here. And like, this one is just total nonsense. Actually, in fact, we're just going to go and fix that right now, because I don't know what drunk bastard made this team. And then I guess we'll just leave it at that. We don't necessarily need too many. I like to usually keep a couple in reserve in order to have the option to go back and deploy them to go defend the main base. So basically, if your main base is taken, you get sent back to the world map.
Iteration.
Alright.
Thank you.
Alright. So another quick notice here is yeah, you may notice, like I said earlier, a lot of this seems to be swarming units towards particular places. Figuring out how to either avoid losing or to lose properly is kind of a big part of this game. So, for example, if you know particular teams are just not very good at holding the line in certain places, you might only use them for attacking. You have other dedicated teams specifically just there to try and not take any kind of damage and things like that. Let's go ahead and pause it real quick, figure out which one of these teams I was supposed to be fixing. Well, first of all, right here, what are these guys thinking? You stick your leader in the back here where they don't get attacked. You stick the archers over here. This way, for example, if you're setting them up like this, these two can properly cover the entire front line despite there being only two of them, while the two archers can fire from behind them, and the cleric / leader is plentifully out of their way. For example, with these ones, it makes no sense because, well, Hellhounds attack 3 times in the front, so pop that sucker over there. Put a second one over here to keep it blocked off. Put another one in the back. They're pretty safe over here on the side. Actually, this was a... Yeah, let's do it a little differently. Let's put the Hellhound over here, this guy over here. Now, you might be thinking, why are you putting the main attacker off to the side? And that's simply because, well, you want them to make sure to stay around as much as possible. So your disposable units are the ones that you want taking the brunt of the hits. Whereas even if they're out of position, like if a unit is completely unable to attack in their usual lanes, they will attack anywhere else. Let's go ahead and let's go strength on this one, boost them up a little bit, because they've got a caster here. That may not necessarily be how that all works. Another thing you may notice about the PS1 version, unique characters actually look unique. I just love everything about this version more than the original. Some folks have told me that, yeah, the original is slightly harder or whatever else. They did do some rebalancing for this one. Like, a lot of the parties are different. One complaint I've seen a couple times is that it messes with some of the lore builds and whatever else. It's not that big of a deal. Like, okay, for example, you got Debonair. He's the wind guy. Fair, whatever. Originally, he had wind dragons, and this one he has fire dragons. Who gives a crap? Supposedly, that was partially because of the fact that if you had anything anti-wind, you could just sweep his entire team, and, like, supposedly, from a defensive standpoint, the fire ones are better. I don't know for sure. It's just one of those things. There we go. Yeah, usually what you want to do is maybe use 1 or 2 cards on encounters you specifically want to win. You have a limited number of cards. There's all sorts of crazy events that can end up happening, like you may end up getting a merchant that just lets you buy stat items infinitely if you have a bunch of money, but you only can encounter the guy 1 or 2 times per game. or you may get a bunch of weird class promotion items, or you may just get a bunch of overpowered gear, or whatever else. Again, the chaos is the meat of this game. Like, adjusting to the weird crap you run into, even speedruns, for example, will just constantly have to adjust on the fly for weird scenarios that happen. Even once somebody knows exactly how to trigger a lot of the events, they can guarantee the RNG for pretty much the first couple maps. From there, it's just entirely God only knows. You may be forced to take fights at the wrong time of day, for example. Like if you draw a card and it suddenly changes the time of day, you know, most of your units are just sitting around with good alignment. Suddenly they're going to have a really hard time keeping stuff together because they fight worse in the nighttime. Or maybe you've got a different team set aside specifically for that reason. Or like right here, we had a team that suddenly took a loss, so we're just going to go ahead and send it back here. They're probably going to have to retreat out of this one. We'll see. But yeah, just adjusting to different scenarios, replacing squads in weird ways, figuring out... Just figuring out what to do with the cards you're dealt. That is entirely this game. Honestly, all of the cards that are thrown around are pretty fitting, because that is exactly what this game's about. Nope. Should barely be able to survive that one. What do we want to do here? Because I don't want these guys getting wiped out this early. I'm going to just give them a quick heal, I guess. So you may have a heal, like a full heal item there. You might not. You can buy certain items, like you can buy full heal items later, but you've only got a limited amount of funds. If you want to keep your reputation up, you need to finish maps quickly, basically under 3 days. And yes, it does take into account random changes a day. So for example, you run into a map, suddenly it's night to day to night to day. Sure, you're getting 2 paychecks real quick, but now you've got about 3 hours to beat the map. It's like... just adjusting to weird crap is this game. And the entire series kind of followed the same thing. This is just the only one that was a little bit more obtuse about it. So it's kind of unclear, and it looks like just a mess of nothing going on, which is unfortunate. And I know that in certain interviews and things like that, they've actually said something to a similar effect of like, you know, we wish that we would have maybe conveyed some of that stuff better. But at this point, the licensing is in such a weird place that it's unlikely they'll ever get a chance to do a remake or anything like that, so... what can you do? Alright, so what we're going to do, we're actually going to fly around to a few different spots here, just to show how some of the different events work.
Liberation.
But generally, yeah, you want to try and sweep the map for events and random items as much as possible. I'm going to try and keep all of the enemy army occupied while you actually have your main guys going about their business.
Fight it out.
Yes, you can get by with using infantry for a lot of it, but usually using specialized beast monsters and stuff like that is better. Actually, I really liked one of the metaphors that this one particular review had used a while ago, wherein they're basically pointing out that they had some fun figuring out that they could combine a few mages and a griffin squad there to just have them sweep in and essentially throw units into the water. So basically just pulling a fell seal on that one, I guess. But yeah, they basically found that, well, they could go throw units in the water where an octopus squad could go and absolutely ruin them. So for example, a unit with 2 octopi in it is probably some of the highest attack power in the game, but they're only good in water. Same thing with mermaids later. They're kind of alright, but they're usually only good in the water, which, interestingly enough, is why we tried a mermaid-only run of this game. It did not go amazingly, but it's, you know, technically an option. It's actually something that I want to revisit at some point, because trying to get it to work kind of caused the game to bug out a whole bunch, so...
Fight it out.
You know, we'll see. We'll see how we go and end up modding it to allow that run to happen. But hopefully at least some of this explained, you know, the different stuff you run into here, what potentially makes it fun, why folks consider it, you know, a classic and whatever else, because it's really just the layers of systems. A lot of stuff in there is really unique. Does it all land? No. It's not a perfect hell. The stuff that does work doesn't necessarily work all the time. Even right here, we keep getting pretty bad draws on the cars, but potentially this will end up fixing some stuff later. But what I was trying to show is that, yeah, you go to that town, they tell you that there's this Wind Rider guy, you run into another town, they're like, hey, he decided to go become a monk or something, and so you go visit a church, and then he's talking about how he's retired. He's too good at the wars, he doesn't have time to do all that. Which I should point out, he's already retired and like in his 50s or something in this one. Meanwhile, he's continuing being overpowered and whatever else years later in Luck. And anyway, little details. I'm trying to think what else. Oh yeah, so in terms of other mechanics, you do see more mechanics added throughout the entire game. Actually, even all the way up to the end maps. Like I mentioned, there's cases where once you're actually out of doing the whole Civil War thing and you're properly invading enemy territory and stuff like that, you basically have to start doing the opposite of what people want. I forget what the exact hint was. There's kind of an interesting note that the whole plot line from FF Tactics actually starts off in this one. You may notice a lot of stuff, like a lot of artifacts and things like that, are just casually sitting around in this one. It's just one of those cases that a whole lot of ideas started fairly early on in that regard.
Fight it out.
So you may notice, like right here, we potentially had the option to draw away one unit, while suddenly there would only be one squad defending this town, making them fairly easy to push backwards. In this case, I probably should have actually moved the cleric to the front to have more attacks versus this particular squad, because these guys are going to get absolutely trounced. So our best bet at this point to make them run away is to use this one right here to go scare off their giant. Actually, that's interesting. I never really realized that, but apparently for larger units, it actually just causes them to disappear. The infantry will run away. Little details. Anywho, what else? Oh yeah, so walls and things like that become a mechanic. Funnily enough, if you find termites, one thing that Evan's pointed out a few times is the fact that, quite frankly, a lot of this fight might well... a lot of the events of this game might well never have happened if it wasn't for Ash showing up with some termites later. You get one box of termites as per the plot. Oh yeah, no, this is the one that caused them to flee. Fool is the one that I think just... Yeah, there we go. So Fool will make everybody run away from the fight. The other one there that I was using will make monster units, or no, will make helpers disappear, temporarily anyway. You got a bunch of very oddly specific abilities is the thing, and also generally speaking, you probably want to keep them on strong. I forgot to mention this as well, you get little bonuses depending on who uses what. So for example, if you tell them to attack strongest, they will also just have a heightened attack power in order to do more damage to those strongest units. They get, I believe, a little bit nerfed in terms of strength, but increased on intelligence or something like that. I think it's either agility or intelligence that gets increased if you tell them to attack weak, but they don't hit as hard directly on physical stuff. You may notice that it sometimes seems like the casters are attacking at random. It's actually not random. They will always attack with whatever will give the most damage at that given time. So they have an entire pool of abilities, but they'll always pick whatever feels the most effective to them. So if anybody's got a weakness, they will use it. Otherwise, they'll just pick one. It's fairly simplistic AI in that regard. Funnily enough, they actually did not even update that going all the way through to the PSP remake of TO. Anywho, I think that more or less covers everything that goes on here. I mean, I don't really want to spoil some of the weird events that you run into, but there's definitely a plethora of them. I mentioned earlier that there's actually a way to potentially go through the entire game hiring everybody. I'm not entirely sure how, because I know somebody ratted it out a while ago, and then that page was unavailable when I found it. But like there's all kinds of different plots going on in this one. Actually, by canon, you're expected to have basically gone through the entire game and done most of those side quests. Like I believe Deneb gets killed instead of hired.
Thank you.
There we go. We get the Just Ice. But you got your Hellgates that open up all over the place. Actually, specifically, this thing I was watching was saying that there were no ogres in the Ogre Battle. There are. They're kind of that side quest thing, because there's kind of this whole background plot that, yeah, there's these Hellgates opening up. However, they did this kind of weird thing where in this one, like, I don't know if they eventually plan to somehow have it read your save file or use a code or something, or hell, even do like a whole Mass Effect PS3 version type situation where you just go through and enter your decisions. But yeah, like, every one of these games ends with a Hellgate opening. This one has like 5 or 6. And all of them are just kind of off in the background, and if you've played Lucked, that's what the deal is with the Brunhild or Brynhild or whatever game you're playing. The name kind of changes a few times. But yeah, the deal is that it goes and closes them. So by canon, the main character of this one ended up getting through... they ended up getting the hero star early, so basically had good reputation early on. Ended up keeping that in the upper range about midway through, ended up getting the sword out of an island in the middle of the dang ocean. And then, you know what, I kind of like to think that there's this demon guy that you can actually just hand it over to. So I like to think they closed up all the gates, and they're like, you know what, this guy seems trustworthy. Also, we want a demon, so that sounds fun. So they handed it over, and then the events of Lucked are just them trying to get it back. I know that's not really how it went or whatever else, but I like to think that's the way it should have gone. There we go. All right. That's the main. I would say that's kind of more or less covering what's going on with this one. I will say to folks that have made it this far that, you know, maybe didn't like March of the Black Queen, even, you know, after being aware of more of the mechanics and whatever else, maybe you still don't like it, still give 64 a shot, because it's completely different. So I'll probably do one of these for 64 next. In fact, we might just do a stream of 64 later on today, but it's just... it's a very, very different situation. Like, this one was a rough idea made into what is essentially a board game made into a SNES game. That's the best way I can cover it. And even by the time they had this PS1 version with a better AI and things like that, it still was fairly rough, but it's got a lot of neat mechanics if that's your kind of thing. Like, personally, I like going back through old SNES games and things like that, and just appreciating where stuff started. Like, for example, was going through Secret of Evermore not that long ago, and it's like, there's a lot of little nice touches here that you would see tons of in years to come, and I'm sure it didn't even start there. Or, for example, going through Earthbound and just seeing the amazing world building they do, or, you know, going back through old Metroid games and stuff like that, and it's like, wow, you didn't see map design like this until, like, Souls came along and stuff like that. Which I have to point out, even that part's not necessarily true, because they did a lot of interesting map design for Armored Core, and that stuff just never gets appreciated. In fact, I'd say a lot of the layouts you see for the Souls games did actually come from, like, first generation Armored Core and things like that, in terms of like how stuff's looping around and all kinds of weird corridors leading to other hidden corridors and just hidden stuff all over the place. They did a lot more than that series gets credit for, but usually most folks look at it and they're like, oh, hey, look, a dumb robot game. Okay, bye. But yeah, that's just kind of the nature of the medium, I suppose. Unlike a movie, unlike some music or whatever else, you kind of got to go through and experience it, and everyone's going to have a different experience. A lot of it's just going to be based down to whether folks understand all the mechanics going on in some cases. Like this one in particular, every time I've seen that, like I said, it's one of those things that leads to its very yes or no opinion. Like, every time I've seen it, it's either love it or hate it. I have never seen anything in between. Now, some of it could just be that it's folks posting in what is essentially, you know, Discords or Reddits or whatever else that are very friendly towards it. But yeah, it's definitely not perfect by any means. It's like, it's one of those things that's best appreciated as an appreciation of the time. Like, they tried. You can see by a lot of the stuff that's there that they legit tried. It was a passion project. It's not perfect, but what made it was interesting. Like I said, it's hard to even explain a lot of the weird mechanics of this one, just because of the oddly specific circumstances that come up. Like, my first time through, I had no clue how the crap I ended up getting a hold of a werewolf. I could never make it happen again until I went and read somewhere like, hey, there's a werewolf boss early on. And I think actually that guy is where we're going to end it, because that's, like, the werewolf boss is really the moment that, aside from some of the, like, little quirks that I mentioned earlier, the werewolf boss, my first time through, like, my actual first time through, not, I should say the first time I legitimately got into the game, because there were several attempts, and I was looking at it like, I don't understand what's going on here. It was that same opinion of, like, you're just throwing units at units. Where's the game here? I want more strategy and builds and things like that. And until that boss, I didn't really understand what the deal was here.
Fight it out.
Because yes, you can mess with team alterations, and you can make all kinds of fun things happen. It's not guaranteed to work, but there's just something really fun about, seeing one guy throwing out acid clouds while an octopus chokes out some other dude, while you're all technically flying because there's a griffin in the team. So you just get this weird mental image of just like this griffin with a friggin' octopus hanging off its tail and a wizard riding on top of it. All kinds of crazy stuff. Like I said, my first time through was just a skeleton leading an army of fairies, for crap's sake. It's wild. Where would you ever see that? I think we'll just go ahead and full card these guys. All the helpers go bye-bye. Yeah, so full card just makes all helpers disappear. Actually, it's funny, they had a little bit of an extra thunder effect to that one in the PS1 version. It's fun. It's fun. But yeah, so the boss that I'm talking about is Sirius. So he's your werewolf guy, and you just see this constant conflicting story flying back and forth. Because every time that you run into somebody that looks like a basic soldier guy, they're like, oh man, this dude's alright, they treat us well, everything's going fantastically, I don't know why you're even here, we don't need any liberating, we're fine, we're great, you guys are dicks, why are you here? And then you meet the locals, and they're like, yeah, this guy's going and, like, dumping bodies in the river, he's eating people, we're pretty sure, maybe, I don't know, do something about that. And yeah, you just keep getting this weird back and forth, and a lot of the maps continue this kind of situation where you don't know who's telling the truth, but you can kind of assume. And then yeah, suddenly you start seeing that many of the towns are like, hey, so, I mean, you should totally go there at night. He's totally going to be tired and whatever else, While other ones are saying, yeah, no, this dude's a werewolf. Just so you know, maybe don't go there at night. It's a fun little thing. And then, I guess once you get roped into the story, that's when you start maybe looking through, and, that was the wrong, I guess they're immune to the Valkyrie now. That's fine. But I guess once you get into the story, that's when you can start appreciating some of the weird mechanics, some of the little quirks all over this dang thing. Again, even your party's going to be pretty much randomized, because you don't know what kind of promotion items you're going to get. In most runs, for example, most folks will never get a Dragon Tamer. The AI uses them all the time, but there's a very low chance of ever getting one, because it's just a random promotion item that you can find. Whereas, despite there only being 2 in the game, it's also surprising how often you wind up with a crown in your inventory. You guys are not going to make it. Oh, barely going to make it. Okay. Just enough. It's like at this point, this little juggling back and forth is what I mean about strategies you'll really only see in this game. Because right here, they're trying to push their way past this bridge, but they can't necessarily do that with a bit more firepower. Both these teams are pretty defensive. We've got these other ones coming in for support over here, while we've got another team going this way to make sure this town's still covered. Like, this is where the actual strategy of this game comes in. Like, again, especially in the PS1 version, because the SNES version, the AI would beeline regardless of how easy it was to get somewhere.
Fight it out.
Whereas, for example, in this one, you generally find that the AI will try to take quicker routes to get to places. They'll try to avoid, like, going halfway across the dang map over the water in order to get to some little hamlet in the middle of nowhere. Just kind of hoping that maybe something interesting will happen. think that's the sleep card. Yes, it is. Okay, good. They've got a chance. Like, realistically, at this point, I should be going into their formation screen and editing the editing lands to go into the back row so that he's not getting killed off. But, you know, little details. And we should have 2 attacks left. Actually, 3 attacks, it looks like. And there we go. They finished that one off. They might get levels, they might not. Generally, you don't want to over-level anyone, because at that point you start losing reputation as soon as they take a town. And that's just one of those things. You usually want to create a situation like this. You're baiting away the enemy squads,
Fight it out.
kind of keeping them busy somewhere else, whereas you have your actual attack squads going in to take the capital, and maybe go back for events. Most events you can go back for at any time, so you don't necessarily have to do them during the fight. This one is actually an exception, because you actually, in order to get both Canopus and Gilbert in your team, which canonically they do, you have to go through all the different towns, you have to hire both of them. It's funny because 3 fairly later plot important characters can just be completely missed in what is effectively the second fight of the game here. Again, they had an unusual route through the game that they chose to go with as canon. But hey, apparently a lot of folks like these 3 in particular, so there they are. Alright, thankfully that missed. They're definitely not in amazing condition right now. So I think what we're going to do, we're actually... Okay, those guys got thrown over here. This guy's going to go take this town over here, which should put them in an odd spot where they want to go back and hide in this town, recover their health a little bit. Anyway.
Fight it out.
So yeah, there is strategy to this game. The unusual stop-and-go manner of it is, well, unusual, bluntly. And again, it's not going to be for everyone, but it's a fun little chaotic romp. And really what always did it for me was just the sheer chaos of it. It's just really hard to overstate how nuts some of the scenarios get to be. Like that ferry run that I was talking about, that when I was going through that one, it was literally just one guy and 4 bugs just basically curb stomping entire armies at one time.
Fight it out.
But absolutely everybody hated them. Even if they liberated town after town after town, every time they went there, they're like, "Hey, so we're the local mafia. Would you like some bribes? Okay, please don't kill us. Bye." Like, it's a very... Honestly, it's a little bit like Fallout 3 did it, I guess. It's not a perfect reputation system by any means, but for its time, it was definitely something different. Let's see. We don't have any more AoEs left. Realistically, we probably should just retreat these guys. Fun note, by the way, your leader, unlike everybody else, your leader will never turn around, because they can't look backwards.
Fight it out.
Also, they probably just never had a reason to be on the opposite side, so they don't have a flipped version of their sprite. That's more than likely the actual reason. But hey, can infer what you will. Also, fun little note on OB64. You actually have both your main characters in that one from this game. Although one of them is actually canonically the leader, which was the main character, who apparently went from like his weird mace and sword setup, because he basically had a shield and a mace in his left hand and a sword in the right, to just a two-hander.
Fight it out.
For some reason. It's a little unclear. I guess they just thought it looked more heroic. And then yeah, this lady shows up as Europia later in the game, who I think actually is pretty much the same character, more or less. And yeah, the interesting thing about a team like this too is they'll repeatedly wipe out squads, usually still leaving them alive to come back and fight them again. So A, that gives you more experience for units if that's your kind of thing. Oh, persuasion spell. So this is one of those random items I was talking about. Because now suddenly this means that we can just take a unit from anywhere. So let's go ahead and use the persuasion spell. Can we use it on this witch over here? There we go. And... Oh, right. It can only work in their followers. It doesn't actually... it doesn't work on leaders. Well, I forgot about that. Still a cool mechanic. Yeah.
Fight it out.
It's like, why are you rebelling? Everything's absolutely crappy, but we should just keep going with that. And yeah, you can have this guy's entire team join as is. Pretty unusual. They don't really get nerfed too bad. And they're pretty OP for a little while. Let's go ahead and retreat them there because they're going to lose it anyway. Interestingly, getting beaten doesn't cause you to lose too much, but if you repeatedly retreat, you're just going to drop in repetition, or you're going to drop in alignment.
Fight it out.
Really sharpish. Go. Lightning happens. Some dog things to happen. Warren's probably your second best attacker early on. With this kind of squad here. I mean, you can put these on anybody really. Probably should have replaced that cleric. Even replaced the cleric and the caster with a hellhound, maybe. I don't know.
Fight it out.
Yeah, in most cases, people prefer the triple attackers. So another potential team you could do is like a main character with a forward triple attack, and then combining that with 2 hellhounds. They'll usually just steamroll everything. So put those to sleep, a little defense reduction type situation. It won't help too much. Let's go ahead and have these guys focus leader. Do hangman here. Probably should have done the defense down earlier, but screw it, it's good enough. Another little minor mechanic that you can see here. Their little side characters will come back every time that you do this. So usually you're better off leaving them at low health and then just immediately coming back. And this is kind of the downside right here with this PS1 version music. Because yeah, if you're repeatedly seeing it get turned off, it's a little bit of an odd one. But anyway, I think that's it. Oh, looks like the kiddos are up, so that's my time. Anyway, so that's kind of my 2 cents on this one. So thank you guys for looking. Have yourselves a good one, and maybe give this one another shot. Take care.